Alex. Thanks for having me on.
Doug, I told you before we started, this is a topic that I cover a lot on the podcast because I really like to cover it. It's something that I'm super interested in learning more about how to become a better leader. I told you as we were getting going here that I didn't become a manager or a leader by choice. It was sort of just, well, the business grew and we added a person here and a person there. And as I stated to you, now we have 40 people. So you sort of backdoor into those skills by doing a bunch of things wrong. So I'm interested to hear your take after having worked with a lot of different people about how to become a better leader, some of your ideas. But why don't you just introduce yourself and then we can go back to the beginning, and I want to hear how you got into this field.
Yeah, thanks. Pleasure again to be here. The quick story is the topic of leadership has been part of my DNA for a very long time. I guess I was kind of born into it in a fashion. And we have a joke in my family about me being the captain of the fifth grade crossing guard in school. Back in my day, we allowed students to be the crossing guards at the elementary school, literally sending 10 and 11-year-old kids out into traffic with stop signs, asking cars to stop so the other kids could cross.
Those are things that would never fly nowadays.
Today, that would not be a thing anybody would allow, I know, but the point is it gave me an opportunity to take on a role of leadership at a very early age, and organizing the crew and, getting everybody scheduled and positioned and all that. And I just loved it. And it wasn't an ego trip thing. It was just my kind of innate sense of service for the greater good. It seemed like an important thing that needed to be done, and I was very willing to go do it. And that's kind of been part of my DNA my whole life. I subsequently kept climbing the ladder, if you will, in student leadership positions all through my school years. I was commissioned an Army officer out of college and went on active duty for a while, did that, left there and was recruited by a large regional bank. I hail from the Houston area, and at the time there was a very large regional bank operating here. They invited me to come join their management team, so I kind of went straight into a management role straight out of the Army, and have been in various management leadership roles ever since. But in parallel with all that, there's kind of another part of my DNA that has to do with entrepreneurship. And I got that from my dear mom.
I was going to ask what the parents did, because you said you felt like you had a calling to service from a young age.
Yep. I had that DNA for entrepreneurship because my single mom, hardworking mom, quit her day job also about the time I was in fifth grade. So I was out in traffic stopping cars, and she quit her day job. So I guess we're risk averse, maybe, I don't know, or risk tolerant is the right word. But anyway, she started her own business, and I didn't know what entrepreneur was at the time. We didn't call it that. She just was a private business owner and turned it into a nice little profit center for us. We had a great lifestyle because of it and thoroughly enjoyed it. But I saw the kind of the independence aspect of it, the opportunity, the flexibility she could create for herself, and it just stuck with me. So after many years in corporate with the big bank game, I went through 2 large bank mergers, ultimately becoming part of the JPM Chase family. I did take an early retirement and went into consulting, which was my own venture at entrepreneurship. I just hung a shingle and started doing consulting work, built that up. Got involved with 4 other entrepreneurial startups along the way, and about 16 years ago, turned all of my attention to coaching, becoming a certified executive coach, and helping other managers learn how to be better leaders. That's it in a nutshell.
What did mom do for her business? Because it sounded like it went well.
It was. She was an interior designer by trade. She had a natural gift for it. She had a wonderful eye for style and color, and spent part of the business. The early years, she was doing residential, so she was helping people remodel and redesign home settings. She got tired of that because the residential market is really tough to serve.
Those dang customers, I know about them. I know
But
about them.
she was invited to do a commercial project it involved an architectural firm in San Antonio where we were living at the time. And it turned out, I don't know that she knew it even at the time, but they were one of the most successful architectural firms. They had probably had a staff of about 40, and that's kind of a big deal if you're an architect. And she helped redesign a new office property that they built, and decked out all of the offices and the common areas and the meeting rooms and everything. And they had this grand opening of all of their clients coming in, and it was a wow. Everybody said, "Holy crap, who is this lady? Where did you find her? We need her." And she ended up, there was a journey there of many, many clients, but she ended up being effectively an in-house designer for, of all things, a food store chain in San Antonio. And at the time, the guy had the vision, the guy that owned this chain had this vision of making grocery stores more hospitable for guests.
Again, probably before his time, before the Whole Foods.
He really was. He was way before his time. And now we hear of stores having so-called signature brands or marquee stores, or I don't know, everybody names them something different, but it's their showcase grocery store. There's a lot of motif, color, and texture and feel to it. She did all that for this guy. And contrast that, again, I'm telling my age, but decades ago, grocery stores were almost like hospitals. All of the freezers were white. All of the appliances were white. They wanted it to be clean and sterile looking because, hey, it's food. You don't want junk in your food. So they tried to show it off with much more of a hospital look and feel, which wasn't really warm and friendly.
And I'm imagining that when your mother was getting into business for herself, that was kind of unique for a single woman to be going into business.
Oh, it was hugely unique. Yeah, hugely unique.
Not to mention you're kind of deep South.
Yeah.
Where there's very traditional gender roles and things like that.
What
did you do? What did you learn from her?
Well, I've actually got a keynote that I do, 10 things I learned from a single mom about business. And among those things, she was the first person in my life that taught me the old adage. I've learned subsequently a lot of people believe in it, but it's don't let them see you sweat. You're going to have challenges in what you do, and you don't want the people around you seeing you, demonstrate some fear and anxiety about what may be happening. You got to power through it. And it's not at all a fake it till you make it, but it's, muster up your courage, steel your nerve, and plow forward and keep going. And so it was that kind of dogged determination. She had another mantra that she taught me. She said, "Get to know your banker." And that's maybe why in the back of my mind, I ended up becoming a banker, because that was a principle that she believed in. And she did. She had a local banker that was always on her side, helped her through a lot of jams, and because she was good for it. I mean, she always, honored her obligations, never bounced a check. And, she was a good bank customer to have. But again, to your point, it was a time when, women in business was still a strange thing.
Do you think that much about how big of an impact seeing your mom be a business owner was versus like the genetics that she passed down to you? I was just listening to someone and they got a genetics test and they were going through the results, and it's like, yeah, you have the M1377 defect, and what that means is this thing, and probably what most likely it materializes as you're very risk averse, or you're very conscientious, or you're very interested in people pleasing. And I was just I was like, wow, I feel like I should take that test. Just because he said he had never thought of like a genetic, like being passed down from, mom to son, as like this is actually going to materialize in some certain gene in your genome that can be read and then tell you like, hey, on average, people with this tend to be like more entrepreneurial or whatever. So my question is, how much do you think is nature versus nurture there?
Well, it's a great question, and I tend to be I'm too easily swayed to get a little geeked out on stuff like that, and so damn you for bringing it up. But
Well, apparently it's not very expensive, so we both should go and do it. He's a wealthy guy, so not very expensive.
Okay, well, that's probably why I haven't pursued that. But I think it's a great question. And by the way, just back to our core topic on leadership. There have been for decades raging debates. Are leaders born or bred? And specific to your question, I don't know. Yeah, probably there's something in my genes about it. Her dad, my grandfather, was an entrepreneur. He had his own business his whole life. So she probably got it from him, and then I probably got it from her. So yeah, I mean, I think that could be a real thing. But part of it, though, I think that is also true, and this would probably be more the nurture part of it, is when you see somebody doing it successfully, you're going to learn about how to do it and what you should be doing, and you kind of can't avoid that learning. But I think maybe the more genetic based propensity would come from being willing to do it when it's your turn and there's an opportunity that opens up. Because I've certainly met and know a lot of people who grew up the child of an entrepreneur, and they will tell you the last thing they're going to do is take over that business.
Sort of like a negative role model.
It's a negative role model.
Yeah. Dad's an alcoholic. I never want to be like that. I never drink. Even if you may have a genetic predisposition, like in similar ways. Yeah, you hear that story often.
Yeah.
I was clicking back around behind this, and I was seeing one test was $300, which it looked like that tests 40 things. The 10X Health test is $1,200, and it has 400 pages, precision genetic analysis. 400 pages sounds like a lot. Yeah, that's a lot of pages. By the time that I've done paying off it, then I won't be finished with my reading. Yeah, and I think that's an interesting thing. I think also sometimes it gives you an out if you go like, well, I'm just genetically like, angry like at people. And it's like, okay, like, come on here. Like you can get better at managing your temper. And to your point that you said earlier before we started this call, you can get better at being a manager. You can get better at being a leader.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That entrepreneur that I was talking about that I really love, one of the things he talks about is hard skills versus soft skills. And you'll probably like this. He says that fundamentally people think that soft skills are difficult to teach or to learn because we have a tougher time breaking them down into component parts. Whereas, like, let's say I wanted to teach you how to, like, run Facebook ads. I'd be like, okay, Doug, open Facebook. Okay, go to the ads console. Okay, once you're in the ads console, like, create a campaign. And it's like, basically, I can just give you a checklist of things to do. And that doesn't make you smart because you can follow a checklist. It's like, oh, I can just repeat that behavior. But when it comes to soft skills, like, well, Doug's not a good leader. It's like, well, I can teach him how to be a good leader. And it's like this ethereal thing. Like, what does that mean that he's a good leader? Well, really what you're saying is he exhibits maybe 10 different behaviors and he doesn't exhibit 10 behaviors. And if I can break those behaviors down for you and just ask you to sort of like replicate those, whether or not you are a good leader, you can like imitate essentially a good leader. And I was like, wow, that's a really interesting way of thinking about it, that if you can just break down those soft skills into their component parts, then you could hypothetically train someone to do that thing. Like
the one caveat, I mean, I fundamentally agree with everything you just said. The one caveat, though, is this, and I can promise you from my years of doing this, it is the deal breaker on coaching or leadership development, and that is the person coachable?
Yeah.
And I have had clients who there was a mandate from corporate, we're going to hire a coach and you're going to work with them. And I got burned a time or two in my early days as a coach, and I now have a hard stop, non-negotiable. I don't do fix-it jobs. If you tell me you're hiring me to fix somebody on your team, I'm out. Not going to do it.
And do you think that's just because in your experience, that person who needs fixed has already been given 15 pieces of advice that they've
The die's already cast.
And one out.
Yeah. And ultimately, what they are probably demonstrating is the fact that they arbitrarily or accidentally got promoted up to a level of fail. And shame on the organization for not identifying it earlier. And ultimately, shame on the individual for accepting the opportunity without really being ready and willing to step into it. But it happens all the time in modern business.
Well, yeah, that's a really interesting point, that we promote people not for the skills that they need at their next job, but for the skills that they exhibited at the previous job.
Totally. That's right.
And that's true in our business. We have someone who's really good at like picking orders. They're very thoughtful. They're very quick. We're like, hey, you should become an orders lead. Well, what does an orders lead do? Well, they don't pick orders anymore. So it's like, oh, so like what I'm really good at, like now you're going to have me not do. Now I'm going to have you stand by a computer and like print the orders. And then let's say you do a great job with that. Then we promote you to orders manager. And it's like, well, what does that person do? It's like, well, they get a bunch of people together and they talk them through what's going to be done throughout the day. And then they will delegate that work. So it's like everything that you did previous is totally different from what you're going to do next. But I guess that's hard because we like to reward people who are doing a great job. Like I understand the dichotomy of what I'm saying right now, because if you kick butt at those first two jobs, like I want you to move up into the orders manager role, but you may not necessarily be good for that.
Yeah, totally. And I talk about this a lot on my own podcast and with my clients. You're spot on. That's been a tradition in modern business for a long, long time. We've got a lead out, an opportunity out on the front line. And what do? We go pick the brightest bulb in the string, best accountant, best engineer, best order taker, best processor. And we say, poof, you're now the team leader. And they may take that assignment willingly and with all the good intentions, but quickly demonstrate that they should not be a leader. I'll tell you a quick story on that note. I had an engagement several years ago. A very large global brand asked me to come in and facilitate a first-time managers course that they had. They had a book. They had this giant 6-inch ring binder of content they wanted new first-time managers to consume. They needed a facilitator to page through the book and lecture and speak and talk about it.
So not your content, sort of. It's
not my content,
their content.
But I knew the idea, and it wasn't bad content. It was, a lot of it was procedural, a lot of it was expectation and process and things, and it all made sense. It was a classic onboarding, if you will, for a new job description. So anyway, I go to the appointed date and time. I've got my book in hand. I walk into this room. There's about 60 of these folks. It was a big company, and they did it in giant waves. They did these picks and promotions. And so I got this audience out there, and I go through the first hour of stuff, and it was time to have a break. And next thing I know, there's a line at the podium. All these people are standing there. Very first guy says, if what you just said in the first hour is what I got to do, I'm out. I want to go back to being an engineer. And I'm going like, okay, well, sorry. Why don't you step over here? Let me take the next question and see what's going on.
I'm going to need to have that conversation like a little later.
Whole line had that same question.
No.
And so I excused myself. I got on the phone with the HR lady who had brought me in. I said, Sue, and that wasn't her name, but I'll use it. I'll say, Sue, you got a problem.
So maybe I have a lot of questions here, but maybe how do you coach people to avoid that trap, right? Because if someone is kicking butt, I want to continue to give them opportunity. Normally, they're kicking butt because they want more opportunity. It's sort of a chicken and an egg problem, right?
Yeah,
Like, so
absolutely.
when people come into our company, I tell them very clearly, I want you to make more money. I want you to move up. If those are the things that you want also, here is our roadmap. Here are the 6 things that you need to do in the first 60 days, 90 days, 180 days that will help you when you get to those next reviews say that you are doing a great job. Doug, you're great. Your enthusiasm, check, great. Your speed of work, great. So when I encourage those things to happen, I want to give those people more opportunities. But how do I avoid running into that problem where I bring Doug on, Doug does great, I promote him to manager, and he hates it?
I think I got the question. Yeah, part of it, I think, is in the selection process of deciding who needs to be your next team lead or next promote up. There does need to be some intentionality about what you're looking for. And I coach this, and I do this in my business advisory work. I tell business owners that every box on your org chart needs to be written without any names or personalities associated with it. You need to basically write the job description for that box to define what contribution of value is that box going to give to the company.
That's really interesting.
So if you design your optimized org chart first, then start looking for candidates that are going to fulfill, a high percentage of that requirement in that box. Obviously, ideally, you want 100% fulfilled, but it's not a perfect world. You might get 95, you might get 90, but you better have 90. I mean, it shouldn't be a 75 or a 60.
So that description of the job might be chief operating officer, and then maybe like their responsibilities. Like,
Yeah.
Covering all operations of the business, which for us involves logistics, shipping of orders, purchasing a product, moving it through the process.
Right.
Then would you want to list like the skills that are pertinent?
I think so. Yeah, I think you need to identify the pertinent skills, and most importantly, and this is where it gets sticky, is think about the best behaviors that can fulfill that. Does this person need to be outgoing and, extroverted, or is a academic introvert a good personality to put in that job? And I hate to stereotype, but for instance, your, chief accounting bookkeeper or ultimately CFO, you probably don't mind an introverted academic that's got that role, somebody that can think deep and run numbers and do that. But if they need to be able to work with the rest of the leadership team, maybe they need a little degree of personality and empathy and connectability, in their wheelhouse to make it work right.
Do you have any suggestions on how to create that box, things that you've seen work well, or ways to pair personalities with like job descriptions? Do you have any tricks or tips for that?
Yeah, well, let me break that down. So yes, it's a multi-step process, but again, I argue that it starts with drawing the boxes first. Just think about, and by the way, Gino Wickman talks about this in his EOS, book, his Traction for the Entrepreneur Operating System.
But I've been so many people reference him and that recently. It's like I can't escape it.
Well, it was a great movement, and it meant a lot to small business. It means a lot to small business. I've lost track of the numbers. I think there's 200,000 or 300,000 subscribers to the program. Maybe it's bigger than that now. Gino sold that brand, by the way. He doesn't own it anymore. But that's another whole discussion. But there's a principle there that I am very much in favor of, and that's this idea of drawing your org chart functionally with the intent of how does this box create value for my business? Now, you can create value by either making money or saving money. You can go either way. That's value to the business, but you need to figure that out. And you should ultimately not have any box on the chart that's just an accommodation or a convenience for somebody, because when you started your business, you asked Uncle Bob to help you, and he's been faithful and willing, and he's been there all along. But now the business has grown to a certain size and he doesn't really quite fit in anymore. What are you going to do with Uncle Bob?
That's a difficult problem. We have a couple Uncle Bobs we love, and some of them contribute at a really high level, but some of them contribute at lower levels.
Well, that's the entrepreneur's lament. And just about anybody that has done a bootstrap operation has had that in some form or fashion. But the challenge is, as the company does in fact mature and grow, and you move from startup to grow up phase and then grow up to scale up phase, your dynamics of how those boxes interrelate change. And you can't just drag it along, pull it along with you, however you started.
What about like identifying personalities within an organization, whether they're already within your organization or they're thinking about coming into your organization? I haven't had anybody really give me a concrete answer about like any personality testing or personality tests that they have used that have been successful. But I'm interested to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, I do have some thoughts on that, and I do apply these and deploy these in my coaching business. There are many, many great personality tests out there, and the kind of the genesis of the old original personality testing was the classic 4-blocker that it was all of them are rooted in Carl Jungian psychology. And the theory is there's 4 basic personality types, and you see them called different things or named different things. But the popular ones that are used is the DISC
I've heard
method,
that one,
or the Myers-Briggs.
I have taken the Myers-Briggs, and I
MBTI, that's one, and the DISC. And what they give you is this typically a red, yellow, blue, green quadrant sort of mapping of personalities. And there's a lot of discussion about variations and degrees and all that, and that's great. My heartburn over the use of those in modern business is this, and I've watched this happen for a long time. Companies spend big bucks to bring facilitators in to administer these things, and everybody gets their little sticker that, you're red, yellow, blue, or green. And every one of those facilitators and the certified licensees administering those tests will tell you the purpose is to help you have an appreciation for the other guy. If I'm blue and you're red, I'm supposed to learn how red thinks. I'm supposed to be a little more open to stepping over into your box, getting out of my blue box and stepping into your red box so you and I can work better together. But 180 degrees opposite happens after the facilitator leaves. Everybody puts their placard on their door or on their computer or on their collar, and they go, "Ew, you're red. I can't talk to you."
They kind of like do the classic like team up thing.
Well, it becomes weaponized.
So this guy's red. You can't talk to him. He's
going to be hard to talk to.
It's almost
us.
Self-reinforcing that one time Doug had a difficult conversation with you, and you're like, "Oh, well, Doug's red, so yeah, he's just like you just really can't have a conversation with him without him getting upset."
Yeah. And I don't know what it is about human nature, but they totally blow past that mission of, now that you know this, go be a bridge builder, go into somebody else's camp, ask them the question.
What if only like executive leadership knew how people scored on those so that they could use that to maybe angle people?
I would still be afraid that there's going to be that artificial bias that gets created by the tagging of that. And I happen to be one that believes, and this is where, I am a man of faith. I have my own, religious beliefs. I don't press that on anybody, but my understanding of scripture says we're all uniquely and wonderfully made. So no two people are exactly alike. You might have a Siamese twin. You look a whole lot alike, but ultimately there's going to be a difference somewhere in that makeup that's going to emerge. It may take years for it to show up, but it happens.
Mhm.
So I argue from a leadership standpoint, leaders need to look for that difference and that variation. And that's why some aspects of the modern thinking about diversity, equity, and inclusion does resonate for me, because in spirit, we're celebrating everybody's differences.
Mhm.
Now, that's another whole discussion we can have about whether that's working or not.
Right. Yeah. I
But
think the way that I got really interested in this is we had a small team, and as the team started growing, we started hiring different people. First thing I found out is that I am not skilled at identifying talent. Like, I don't know if anybody is skilled at identifying talent, to be honest. Like, that is I don't know how you get good at that, but if I was like a better or an odds maker, I would be just getting killed by Vegas right now based on my predictions of who's going to be a kick-ass employee and who's not. And anybody who hasn't started hiring like large groups of people probably is like, oh, I would be able to do that. I'd be able to interview Doug and tell you whether or not he's going to be great for that position. You're not going to be able to do that. Sometimes you think Doug's going to be absolutely, just a rock star, and then he's a dud, and then vice versa. You hire somebody, you're like, I don't know, we'll give him a shot, and they end up being amazing, and you're like, oh my gosh, like I am not good at predicting this. So that was part of my impetus, is like, can I just get like another piece of data other than just like, this guy seems cool, I like this guy, like, it's just like the vibe, like, this guy seems like he can do the job, he's cool, like, he didn't say anything weird in the interviews, he sounds smart, he puts his words together, I think he can do the job. So I was just looking for something a little bit more like.
I do have an answer for that, but before I get to it, let me tell you a quick story on your point there about hiring. Once upon a time, I was recruited to join a company that was doing a kind of a startup in a fashion, and the guy that was CEO hired me to be kind of a division head for him. And we were building out this division. We were going to hire about, I don't know, 30 or 40 people, something like that. And we started talking about hiring, the very thing. And I made a comment to say, well, I've been doing this for a long time. I think I'm pretty good at it. I don't have a concern. And he said, bullshit. And he said, hiring is a crapshoot.
No.
He said, I don't care who you are, hiring's a crapshoot. And I said, oh, no, I disagree. And we had this kind of friendly debate. But as years went on, even after that, I kind of came back and I said, I owe you an apology. I think you're fundamentally right.
If somebody's out there and they have a formula for it, I'm definitely interested in how to make better hires. I just got a framework recently that I'm kind of, very interested in using. But I told you before we started, we're building a facility and we are like maxed out for space. So it's like nobody new in the company yet. Like, we don't have a restroom.
Well, I can tell you, I've got a lady on my team who is an adjunct advisor for my group, and she is certified in something called the Predictive Index, and it is a toolkit. And what you can do, and it's pretty cool. I've seen it in play, and it works pretty darn well. What you can do is you can map back to my org chart box thing that I was talking about. When you say my ideal candidate needs these attributes, you can list off the attributes, and there's a long pick list that this tool provides you to choose from. And very exhaustive, actually. I mean, it'll overwhelm you with ideas, but you can pick the critical elements that you think would define success in that role, and then you administer this test to your candidate, and it will line up. It will show you where they are horizontally and vertically on scales of the probability of success for the role. And it does introduce some personality assessment measures, as well as a little bit of job history of other experience and background that the person may have. And you can line this thing up and say, well, you're going to be a good fit or you're not. And like, for instance, sometimes there are roles where you say to yourself, whoever's in this seat, they're going to have to be able to really deal with ambiguity. We just often don't know what we don't know about this piece of the business. And this person needs to be our air traffic controller. And there's going to be a lot of chaos and uncertainty. Well, as you can imagine, there's some really personality biases that either work or don't work in a situation like that. There's some people that thrive with that uncertainty. They just love it. It's a challenge. I'm going to hit me with another one. I'm ready to go. But there are other people that, they can't stand uncertainty. They need to be locked in. They need to know what's coming next. They need to be prepped and prepared. And, their personality is just going to crumble under that kind of pressure.
Yeah. Another thing that I kind of was thinking as to why some of these personality tests would be good is we brought this gal on. She was like just fresh out of college and had never worked like a real job before. And we were like, not to say nervous, but we're like, well, this person's fresh out of college. I'm 33. She's like 21 at this point. So I'm like, there's just a gap in age there and a gap in experience. And she came in and immediately started kicking ass. And we're like, oh my God, like she's so organized. She's so conscientious. She's so thoughtful. She's so like attentive to the details. And I was just kind of thinking, wow, I really would love to hire like 5 more people just like her. But I don't quite know like what that thing is, right? So maybe if you could go back and say, hey, like our star employees in this role, when we look back at that test, they were, whatever, they were blue or they were ENTJs or they were this kind of combination. Then at least, as I go out, I can say, hey, like these are kind of the skills and the personality types that I'm looking for that in past have worked. Not to say past performance is an indicator of future success, but it's at least a good start.
There have been a lot of tools that take that approach. They say, and the predictive index that I talked about does that as well. You can take an existing team and you can say, these 3 people are my rock stars. I know they crush it every day. I don't know why, I'm not sure, but you give them the test and inevitably there's a commonality in the profile that emerges. And you see these attributes that are laid out in the results that start to shape a profile that you say, okay, that's the model for high success in this function. So now you flip that around and you say, okay, that's my requirement. I want to recruit people that fit this profile. And then you give that test to new candidates. And when you get an alignment and an overlap, then you've got a higher probability of success. Nothing's perfect, but you got a much higher probability of it working for you.
You said that's called the predictive index?
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, well, let's take things back. I've been kicking butt in my role. I've been promoted now, and I'm a manager of a small team. This is what I always dreamed of. Maybe it's not what you always dreamed of. You dreamed of making more money, right? And now they're telling me I can do that if I just, go manage these.
Take on these 12 things.
Yeah, I got to manage these 6 hooligans and see what I can do with them. So where do you kind of counsel someone who is maybe just starting into management to like begin this process, and what are some of the key elements that they need to keep in mind?
Well, when I get a chance to talk to a first-time manager, I actually, surprisingly, I don't even start with the job description or anything. I try to make it really internal and personal. I try to challenge them with the discussion of, it would be like, okay, Alex, you're this new manager. What do you think a good leader looks like? Have you ever thought about defining a good leader? And it's not uncommon. I get a little bit of a blank stare. Well, I don't know. Okay, well, let's start with something really basic. Think back. Think about people you're aware of, or maybe you worked for them along the way. Maybe you had some direct exposure to them, or you just know them from, they're a public figure, they're a sports figure, they're a historic figure. You read, heard, or saw something about a leadership attribute that you think is kind of cool. You say, I like that. If I could do some of that, that would be good. And how many of those attributes can you put on a list so that you can start defining the leader you think you want to be?
What are the attributes that people will time in and time out say?
Right.
What are the ones that you hear? Yeah.
Oh, you're asking me? Well, yeah. The list can be really varied because the reason I came to this approach when I first started coaching, and again, I said I was always a student of leadership. I was kind of a geek out on anything leadership. I read most all the books on it, studied it in school, et cetera, et cetera. But I thought to myself, okay, I'm going to be a coach. How do I define leadership? And I thought, well, who the hell am I to define it? I mean, yeah, I could make a list. I could design a program. So let me go see what some of the latest writing is. So I go to Amazon, I put in leadership, and there's like 60,000 books on leadership. It's like, okay, that's not going to work. But
those are just the English ones.
Yeah. If you cherry pick the best of the best, I mean, if you go for, Brian Tracy and John Maxwell and John Collins and, some of the others that are very hot and well respected, they all have a notion of a list of attributes.
Okay.
And the words are different depending on who you're talking to, but they often sometimes mean the same. And a lot of times you get things like, it starts to sound like core values and beliefs, but it's things like honesty, integrity, trustworthy, communication, reliable, dependable, accountable, responsible, it can go on and on. And what I use is I use an analogy, and some people get it and some don't, but most do. I consider leadership to be a little bit like the game of golf.
Okay.
You've got 14 clubs in your bag per the regulation for, official rules of golf. And each one of those clubs is designed for a different purpose.
Mm-hmm.
And some are designed to hit the ball far and long, and some are designed to make it go really high up in the air but fall really short. And that's by intention. And the best golfers learn how to take each individual club and hit it multiple ways to get different outcomes depending on the situation.
That's why golf is so damn hard.
And that's why golf is so damn hard. And that's why good leadership is hard.
I agree.
You got situational change moment by moment when you're in a role of leadership. You've got people that, 4 days out of 5, they're going to show up and they're going to give you a certain level of performance. But on that 5th day, they show up and you go, what the heck? Who are you?
Yeah, I was just going to comment that you have different situations, different environments, and then you got, different people, and even different people, to your point, different days. Like Doug and Bill may do the same job, but you cannot say the same thing to Doug and Bill. Or like Sarah and Doug. Like if you say something to Doug, he might be like, yep, you're right, boss. And you say it to Sarah, she might like break down in tears and start crying. And you'd be like, I didn't even feel like I said anything like that. Wait a minute.
Right.
And one of my former colleagues, and this was sort of naive, his first time leadership kind of thing for him. He used to say, like, I don't feel like I have to change myself to like talk to other people. And I'm like, that's like pretty much all management is, actually. Like that's almost like the definition of management is changing yourself to like get the desired result from a specific person.
Well, I think that's why I like the golf analogy. It's a situational sensitivity. You know,
Mhm.
I mean, could I hit a 2-foot putt with my driver out of my bag? Well, yeah, technically I can, you know, but am I going to have a much higher degree of success if I pick my putter, which is a very square, flat head to tap the ball enough to make that 2-foot distance, you know?
Mm.
So so going back to the model, what I encourage my clients to do is spend some time thinking about that list of attributes. So that's effectively picking the clubs you want to put in your bag.
Okay.
And then our coaching time together is about talking about what are the nuances of those, each one of those, when for all the spectrum of possibility you might run into on a day-to-day basis where you work, you know.
Okay. So let's say I've identified, doesn't have to be 14. I get it. That's a golf number. But let's say I have, 5 or 6. Hopefully it's not 14 because that's a lot of things I got to learn. Let's say I have 5 or 6 things that I think, hey, if I was a great leader, I would communicate with my team, good, bad, or ugly. I would be very transparent with them. I would be honest. I would stick to my word. I would, maybe do 2 or 3 other things. Okay, I've got those core values. I've maybe written them down and I'm actually starting to remember them. How do I hone in on those particular things that I have chosen to use as sort of my leadership values?
Great question and fairly simple answer. It comes down to the key word or key phrase, be intentional. So what that means is, and my best practice that I recommend to people is find yourself 5 minutes at the start of every day. Look at your calendar, anticipate the meetings that have been scheduled, the encounters you think you're going to have, and think just for a minute, okay, in this situation, I'm going to be talking to one of my more sensitive employees. I'm not even going to put a gender on it. I'm going to just say I'm talking to one of my more sensitive employees. I want to dial it back a little bit. I want to be a little more empathetic, a little more compassionate, a little softer in the way I communicate what I've got to say. But right after that, I know I'm talking to Bill, and he's just, he's an old Marine. He's tough as nails. I can tell him anything and he'll be fine. And, we're going to just go with it. So, but it's that front end of the day, anticipating how your values, how those leadership principles might get called into play.
Mm-hmm.
And try to do a little bit of mental prep for that moment. Then the other thing is on the end of the day, book some time to evaluate how you did for the day.
Okay.
Did I hit the mark? Did I represent these principles and values in everything I did today? And if you say to yourself, "Oh yeah, that first meeting I crushed it. I was right on the mark. Everything went the way I wanted it to. It was a good meeting. We got everything done." Gold star. But then the next meeting you go, "Ugh, man, I had a chance to be more present with my person and I wasn't. I got triggered to go somewhere in my attitude and in my message that I regret doing." And when you're doing that evaluation, you may even decide, you know what, I need to go back tomorrow. I need to revisit this thing with that person.
Maybe apologize, maybe tell them
I missed my
didn't
mark.
come out the way that you wanted.
It didn't come out the way I wanted it to. It's not what I believe I represent. So I need to go, set it right.
Well, what you just said there is something that I feel like a lot of people in leadership have a tough time doing, which is admitting that they didn't do a great job, or admitting that, like, hey, it didn't work the way that I wanted it to go, which I think is a very junior leadership trait, where you're like, I refuse to admit that I was wrong, or I made a mistake, or this didn't go the way that I wanted it to. Whereas I think that as you evolve and you're more like confident in your leadership, you can raise your hand and go, you know what, guys, I make a mistake all the time. I make mistakes. Like, I made a mistake yesterday. I was talking to Bill, and you know what? I said something I shouldn't have said, and that's on me. I get it that that happens to you guys all too. I think what's important is we make our best effort, and then you can kind of, I personally think that endears your team to you. They go, well, Alex will admit when he makes a mistake. Like he won't double down and be like, no, I didn't do that. It's like kind of toxic when you do that, to be honest.
Well, I tell the story. I had a chance a few years ago. I live in the Houston area. We've got a lot of oil and gas activity. I was working for one of the big oil companies, and I was working with one of the very senior executives who was responsible for really large scale manufacturing stuff going on. Mm-hmm. So he had like these 6 plant managers and each one of these plants were $1 billion operations. I mean, these were no small deals. And it's heavy industries, so stuff happens. People get hurt. There's accidents. Things happen. Well, there's a protocol. When something like that happens, the plant manager has to call my guy and report up. And so I'm having a session with my guy, and I could tell he was a little bit distracted. I said, "What's going on?" And he said, "We just had an incident at such and such a location." I said, "Okay." I said, well, I'm curious. When the plant manager called you, what did you say? And he kind of got real sheepish and kind of tried to dodge the question, like, And anyway, long story short, it took me 3 or 4 tries. I pulled it out of him. I said, "What did you say to the guy?" And he said, "Well, fundamentally, I chewed his ass for having a mistake." And I said, "And how did that work?" And he said, "Well, I'm not sure it did much of anything." And I said, "No. And when you were one of those plant managers and your senior, the guy that was in your seat now, when he chewed you, how did that make you feel?" He said, "I just knew it was part of the game. I knew I had to have my moment in the barrel, and, I had to deal with it." And I said, "So why do you do it that way now?" And he thought a minute and he said, "Because I guess that's the way I was taught." Mm-hmm. And I said, "Okay, guess what? You're now the guy. Mm-hmm. Do you want to keep doing that?" He said, "No, I really don't." And I said, "Okay, what are you going to do the next time a phone call comes?" And he said, "I'm going to have compassion and empathy, and I'm going to coach." And I said, "Good." And I said, "Let's see what happens." Well, about 90 days later, I got a call from their HR director, and she said, "What have you done with my guy?" I said, "What do you mean?" And she said, "The plant managers love him to death. And it's the first time in this history of this company that plant managers are engaged with the senior exec that way." And I said, good. That's progress. I'm glad to hear it.
Yeah, there's this quote that I'm trying to find by Nick Saban, and it's something along the lines of negative experiences without the associated teaching are a breeding ground for toxicity. And I was like, whoa, like that's a great one, because essentially, like, what it sounds like you're discussing is like negative experience and there was no teaching associated with it. It was just, "Doug, you bitch." And then it's like, okay, well, what did I learn? Don't do that again. That's like pretty much all you learn. That's a breeding ground for toxicity. And you could totally see how that's totally true with like young football players. And every once in a while, you do see like that coach like on the sideline, like really yelling at a young player, which, that might be partially the environment. Who am I to say that's a good thing or a bad thing? But the mistakes that you made, like, here's what we need to do to alleviate it in the future. And like, we love you, we support you, we want you on this team, you're a good football player. Like, you could totally understand how it's like that creates toxicity. And that is like a framework now that I really try to think about, like the negative experience without the associated teaching. That's a breeding ground for toxicity.
It's a great phrase and great quote, and I agree. And that was the whole point of it. And it also speaks. I was talking with another gentleman on my own podcast recently, and he said, it is funny in modern business how people emulate what they experience from above as they're moving up the ranks. And that behavior may not be good at all, but because there's this notion that person was successful, because they rose up the rank and they're above me now, and now there's movement, and now you're that guy or gal. It doesn't mean you have to perpetuate that same behavior.
Yeah, I found it. Nick Saban used far fewer words. He just said negative experiences without teaching kills morale.
Yeah.
I love that. I love that. Okay, so you've got your core leadership principles. You are starting to like come in contact with them and become familiar with them. How do you kind of coach people to then go through like, okay, bad thing happened. I know you said you kind of will recap the day or think about it in the moment, but are there like little tips and tricks that you can say like, okay, I have to have a hard conversation with somebody. Like, how would you coach someone up on going into those types of situations as a manager? I think it's real easy to like pat somebody on the back. A phrase that I love is catch people doing the right thing. But communicating the wrong thing seems to be a lot harder, in my opinion.
Yeah. Well, that notion of having a tough discussion with an employee is one of the biggest challenges of being a manager and leader in the modern world. But the thing that I advise people to consider is the decisions are often tough because the expectation or the standard was never really communicated properly. You assume too much.
Oh gosh, that's one of my favorites. Well, I shouldn't have to tell Doug. He should know that he has to do that.
That's right.
That is
That's
like
right.
when I hear that phrase, it's like a bright light just went off and somebody took a highlighter to that phrase. Like, okay, there's your problem.
And the way in fact, I was talking to somebody this morning, one of my clients about it this morning. I said that what you got to do, and this is this was mind blowing for me when I was first taught the principle. When we hire a new employee, there's usually a lot of talk about expectation. And it starts with the employees saying, okay, you told me you're paying me X dollars a month. Is that still true? Yes, that's right. Okay, good. And I would like to get reviewed and have a chance for promotion every 6 months. Is that doable here? Yeah, I can do that for you. Yes, that's good. Okay. And it goes on and on and on. You put these little bogeys out there on the horizon of what's got to happen. And the boss may say, okay, my expectation is I need you to be here on time. I need you to read and understand your job description. I need you to follow my procedures. I need you to use my system properly. And we've got those kinds of expectations. Well, that's not enough because, the very next day, this unsuspecting new employee is processing a transaction and something goes sideways, and the boss has to show up and say, you messed this up. What we got to have a talk about that. That's not okay. And the person is sitting there going, well, what's really not okay about it? I processed the order. I took the payment. What's not okay about this? And then, well, you didn't fill out this card or this screen or this, this data point, and we got to have that to be able to fulfill the order. We need to know all that, and you didn't get that from them. All you did was take their money, and it all snowballs after that. So the point is, those early discussions need to include not only expectations, but you need to talk about obligations. And both parties, employee, employer, both need to state their view of expectation and obligation.
Can you differentiate expectation and obligation for me a little bit?
Yeah, there's an interesting, and I've done this in a training program. There's an interesting, if you drew a 4-blocker chart, with the horizontal, I guess, would be employee, employer, the 2 boxes lined up, and then up and down would be expectation and obligation. in very simple terms, I'll just use quick examples. The employee says, I expect to get paid X, because that's what we negotiated in my offer letter. And the employer would say, agreed, that's my obligation to pay you that. You expect it,
Okay.
and now I'm obligated to pay it. So
Okay.
that there's a crisscross matchup there. Flip side of that is, if the employer says, I expect you to follow our procedures and learn how to use our system, the employee would say, I agree, that's my obligation. I need to, show up on time and use the system properly. Take your training and use the system properly.
Mm-hmm.
So there's actually, the good news is there's a natural crisscrossing matching of things when you get it working right, that for either side, what might be the other person's expectation ought to be the other one's obligation.
I see. Yep. So my expectation is Doug will join me on the podcast. Your obligation is to join on the podcast.
That's right.
And then if there's a miscommunication there, it's either one of two parties, like either A, I did not establish my obligation that our podcast was at 5:00 on this date and time, and here's the link, or you, yes, Alex, I missed that obligation. That's on my side.
Yeah.
Okay, I like that. Yeah, one that I recently just heard that I sort of fell in love with, and I actually just drew it so I can kind of show you. It's going to be hard to see really or make much of, and my remarkables clicking around. But essentially, it's a square with what, how, when, motivation, and then in the middle is block, because it's like a block. And it's a nice framework for whenever you go into a conversation with an employee about maybe something that wasn't getting done in the way that you wanted to. It's very, very similar, but it breaks down your obligations and expectations to, like, let's say, the example you used, someone was not, collecting customer information. Well, did you know what I wanted you to do? Yeah, I knew you wanted me to collect customer information. Okay, so you didn't do it. So we move on to how. Do you know how that I wanted you to do it? Well, no, Alex, I never got trained on this thing. And it's like, whoop, okay, light goes off. Like, this is not Doug's fault in any way, shape, or form. Like, I did not establish my set standards. Again, to your point, I did not establish my expectation that you would do it in this particular way. Then you kind of move on. Okay, you knew what to do. You knew how to do it. My training was really thorough. I gave you every little piece that I possibly could. Then we moved to the when. Well, I didn't know you had to have them done every single day at the end of the calendar day. You never told me that. I mean, that's just a really common one. Like, gosh, I really hope Doug would send me this thing. And it's like, well, did you tell him when it's due? It's like, no, I didn't tell him when it's due. It was due yesterday. It's like, well, does he know that? No. Okay. Well, now I just need to set an expectation of like when this thing is going to be completed by or needed. So then if I've established the what, the how, the when, then we move to motivation. Like, is Doug in some way, shape, or form like not motivated to insert this customer information? Well, like, kind of what's in it for me? Like, this is a ton of work. Well, okay, this is how you move up in the organization. The person who inserts the most customer information, is rewarded for that. They get the highest pay raises, or maybe you get 10 cents per customer, a piece of information that you put in or something like that. So someone might just not be motivated. You might not have an incentive alignment between the behavior that you're asking for and the outcome. And sometimes the motivation is just like, Doug, you're going to get fired if you don't do this thing. Like, come on, we have to do this thing.
Right.
And then is there something blocking you? Well, yeah, I keep trying to insert the customer information, but the system keeps giving me an error. And it's like, oh, like, well, the system has an error if you use Safari. So like, I need you to use Chrome. And then it's like, okay, we can just kind of go through this thing. And I really like that, because then if I have to go into a tough conversation, I'm kind of protected if they say, yep, I knew what to do, how to do it, when to do it, I'm motivated to do it, and I don't have any blocks. Then it's kind of like, all right, so do you understand why I am like confused on why this is not getting done? And they probably, hopefully, will say, yeah, it makes total sense why you're
Right.
concerned with it. But a lot of times, Doug, what's going to happen is the finger's going to get pointed back to you. And it's like, yeah, you never trained me to do this. It's like,
Yeah.
okay.
Well, and so yes, it ultimately, you can roll all this up in the fundamental leadership attribute of good communication.
Mhm.
Communicating what's necessary, what's required, the training on how things operate, what the procedures, policies, and practices are, and all the steps and all those things. The other dimension I'll add to what you're describing there, I had a client actually teach me this, and I've loved it ever since. And that is, when you think in terms about somebody's job description, we're back to the boxes on the chart again. You've got, 5 or 6 key things you expect them to do and want to teach them how to do. But employees are often quick to say, when am I going to get promoted? When am I going to get a raise? And now you get into this subjective realm of, well, how you doing with what I gave you?
Yep.
And this person introduced me to a simple grid that said, seen it, done it, mastered it. 3 layers. So again, when you think about, let's say there's 5 things on the job description, when you're doing your one-on-one check-in with them, 90 days after they started, you can proactively do that. Say, let's take item number 1. Have you seen this happen? Oh yeah, I saw it. It was in training. I got it. Well, okay. How many times have you done it so far? Oh, I get to do it every day. There's a thing I'm doing. Well, is anybody counting on you for doing that? That's the mark of a master. When you become the go-to person on that thing, because you know it so well, you've done it so well. And you could make an argument nobody gets promoted until they've mastered all of the things in their current job description.
Yeah. To me, the management thing is the hardest thing to master. That's almost like, I don't know if you can master that.
Well, I was going to say, shifting gears a little bit, back to the idea of picking 5 or 6 or maybe 10 attributes in your leadership tool bag that you want to work on and master. About the time you get them all starting to look like mastery, where they show up in your day-to-day kind of more as automatic, sixth sense kind of things. You don't have to think so hard about making it right. They just happen. About that time, you might either you get promoted by the organization or the circumstance, and you realize there's a whole nother level. It's kind of like, gamification. There's a whole nother level. You get through the cave, and now there's a whole new level of challenge that's behind that door. You're going to be introduced to the need for several other attributes that you haven't yet had a chance to work on or work with. And that's what makes the leadership journey a lifelong learning process.
How different do you view management and leadership? Maybe talk to me about what you view the difference of those things to be. Are those interchangeable or no?
Great question. No, they're not. When I first started coaching, I used to ask people the question, is there a difference between management and leadership? And at first, it was a stumper of a question, but over time, I guess people got more enlightened. There's been a lot more dialogue about it. And now I don't ask the question that way. I just assume everybody agrees there is a difference between management and leadership. So I ask, what do you think the difference is? And I'll get various answers. But the best way I sum it up is a simple phrase that says, management is about process, but leadership is about people.
Okay.
Now, managers can be great at executing process, and people can make a whole career out of doing nothing but executing process. Hit the numbers, push the volume, make budget, get it done all day long. The problem is when you look at the bigger picture of what's going on in that situation, you probably have employee turnover, you probably have a high degree of churn, and you probably have a lower margin on your outcome than you could have if your operation was a little more efficient. Because everybody agrees that turnover is expensive. When you have to retrain or train a new person, you've got downtime. And so you're spending dollars on salary and payroll that aren't going anywhere and aren't producing anything for you.
Well, there's definitely that, Doug, but also the thing that I think actually is under talked about is when you are needing to replace a person that is lost, you're just staying at stasis. Like you cannot grow when you are losing people that you previously had. So if you want to take your business from $1 million to 2 million and you just lost 3 people, well, now I have to retrain and hire 3 people. It's like, how is that going to go to 2 million? You're going to need to hire more people to go to 2 million. So actually what you need to hire is 5 people, not 3 people, because you want your business to grow. Nobody wants their business to slide backwards. Right. So it's kind of like this concept of like reoccurring revenue. Like you want to be able to go out and sell the revenue in 2024 and keep it in 2025 and keep it in 2026 and keep it in 2027. That's how a $1 million business turns into 2 and 5 and 7 and 12. Like those businesses that you have to go out and keep like, you know, eating what you kill. I've been in those businesses and those are really hard businesses to be in. And that's exactly what's happening when you turn your employees over, is like you've become an eat what you kill type business where you constantly have to go out and hire and train. And
totally agree. Totally agree. So it begs the question, can leaders be managers? And the answer is yes. Yes. You know, a good leader who is going to be effective at the inspiration and motivation of people should become a good manager of the process as well. And that's where some technical skill and learning on the individual's part, is important, where, you need to learn the process that you're leading. Now, do you have to be the one doing it? No, but you ought to have an appreciation for what it takes and what's involved so that you can talk about it. You can sometimes demonstrate and show. I tell a story along that line. In my banking days, at one point I was head of a department. I had about 90 people, and we were involved in real estate loan administration. These are large commercial deals. A lot of them were construction. So in banking, and you do a construction loan, there's a draw process for, money to get distributed. And one day I was walking through my area and one of my analysts stuck his hand up and said, "Hey, Doug, can you answer a question?" I said, "Sure." And he pulls out this draw request he was working on. And he said, "I've come up with this, and this, and I've got this issue here. And I'm thinking this, what do you think?" That's right. So I walked him through it and gave him an answer. And he said, "I knew that, but I was just wondering if you knew it." And I said, "I tell you what," I said, "I am always happy to answer legitimate questions, but don't waste my time ever doing that again." Mm-hmm. He said, "Well, I was worried that the big dog knew what he was doing." I said, "I didn't get to be the big dog without knowing this."
That's a good way of handling that. Because the reality is, like, there are things that I don't know how to do. Like at the company, like if I walk out there and they're like, "Ship some orders," I'm like, I haven't shipped orders in like 6 or 7 years, guys. Like, not to say that I won't help out, but like, you're going to have to show me the process, because the inventory systems change and the technologies change. Our methodologies have changed. And I am never ashamed to ask someone, be like, "How are you doing that? What's the process?" Because one thing that I have found that people do not like is when you come into their area as the boss and you like go in and fix things. Like, I'm going to come in, I'm going to fix it, and I'm going to leave. And
I agree. Totally.
I have to tell like leaders, like, "Hey, look, like I understand what you're trying to do. You're trying to help, but you're really just making people upset with you, and you're not really understanding the core problem. And I get it that you are super busy and you don't have a lot of time. So you want to jump into their department for 30 minutes, identify the problem, give them the solution, and then leave. And that would totally work if those people were toddlers. Like, what do you guys mean you don't know how to, like, order a new phone on the internet? It's like,
Yeah.
well, we're 6. Like, we don't know how to do that. It's like, okay, I'm smart. I can fix this in 15 minutes. But when you're dealing with like intelligent people and you try to come into their area and fix it, people do not enjoy that. Like,
No.
they're like, dude, you didn't understand the problem. You've spent 10 minutes here. Like, we are not idiots. Like, and you're kind of treating us like idiots by thinking you can solve this in 5 minutes.
Well, and I think that's one of the biggest challenges when young people get opportunities to become managers of teams that have older employees on them. I think that's probably the classic number one mistake the new guy makes, is trying to come in like they know it all and they're going to fix things. And you lose a lot of credibility that way. And the story I like to tell about that is in my Army days as a young lieutenant, I was put in charge of the dining facility on our base. And I had this new sergeant get assigned to, and he's the guy that was really going to run it on a day-to-day basis. But I was still, overall, as the officer, I was still responsible for it. So he shows up, reports for duty, and I'm doing a little intake kind of discussion with him. And I could tell he just had this attitude like I was some little, know nothing and not a lot of respect. But I didn't let that bother me. And we kept talking. And finally I said, Sergeant Culver, I detect a little negative vibe here. Can you tell me what's going on? And he just kind of scowled at me and he said, I don't like officers in my mess hall. And I said, okay, fair enough. I said, I tell you what, I said, reading your file here, I know you're an expert. You've won all the Army blue ribbons for good operations and good food and health and sanitation, everything. Check all the boxes. I said, that also tells me that I've got responsibility for signing your requisitions. If I don't sign your paperwork, you're not going to have a drop of food in that mess hall to work with. I said, so here's my offer. When you get your paperwork ready, you call me. I am going to come in your mess hall and I will sign the paperwork, but I promise I'll turn around and walk out. He said, okay, that's fair. And he stood up, actually smiled finally for the first time in the whole meeting. And instead of saluting, he reached out to shake my hand. So I grabbed his hand, gave him a hard handshake and said, we're done. Thank you. So next morning I get this phone call. Hey, Lieutenant, my paperwork's ready. Said, okay. I walked over there, across the parking lot from my office. I walked over there. He had it all laid out on the table. I reviewed it, signed it, turned around, walked out. Didn't say a word. And next day, phone rings again. Hey, Lieutenant, got more paperwork. Can you come over? Sure. I walked over there, reviewed it, signed it, turned around, walked out. Third day I get over there, the paperwork's all laid out, but now there's all these flavored coffees and these beautiful pastries laid out on the table. So I sit down, I review the paperwork, sign it, get up to walk out. And he goes, Lieutenant, where are you going? I turned around, I said, you don't like officers in your mess hall. We had an agreement. And he laughed. He said, oh, forget it. He said, check some of this stuff out. I'm thinking about putting this out for such and such. And that was it. I had him.
That's kind of what I would call like a G check. You're kind of checking him like, okay, well, like, do you want to do this? Do you want to make this a problem? That's a tough skill though. Like, cause sometimes I don't want to say attempt that, but that person clearly could have reacted in the wrong way and been like, forget this guy, no, you're never allowed. And it could snowball in the wrong direction. That's a tough skill to read. And that's part of what good leadership is half as much knowing the tools, but half of it is just reading when to use those tools, right?
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. On the topic of leadership, I pulled up, we were talking about management versus leadership. I got this quote from PJ Fleck. I don't know why I'm just doing all football coaches right now, but he says it's one thing just to say stuff and think you're being a leader, but when you're infectious and guys want to be like you and they react to what you want them to do, that's the sign of true leadership, when you get people to do extraordinary things. And I think that's maybe sort of like a reverse, like a selection of you as the leader, as opposed to you being like announced as the leader. Do you have any thoughts on that? Like, someone's announced as the leader, and that's sometimes a difficult position to be in, because you're sort of forced to earn the respect of those people. You weren't given the respect of those people.
Yeah. Well, I fundamentally agree with that phrase, and that is, and I think that's why it is important, and that's why sometimes in the modern business world it's so hard, because the bigger the company, people are going to tend to get assigned, and they're going to inherit teams that they didn't build. The team already exists, and the manager is going to get moved around, reassigned, and be held accountable for a new assignment. And you're going to have that, and that ability to turn that situation around and inspire the people on that team to do what it is you're trying to get them to do. That is the real art of being a leader. And leadership is both art and science. There's definitely a lot of science metrics and things you can think about on leadership and people development and all those things. But there's no denying there's a heavy dose of art and style that's associated with it that helps create the persona that people may gravitate toward.
Yeah.
Or run away from.
Oh yeah. There's definitely that too. I think that's why people believe that, like, he's a natural born leader, because it is this ethereal thing that it's like, I don't know, Doug just has something that I can't quite put my finger on, but people like him. Whereas again, I kind of want to do it in your way, where it's like, hey, let's break those skills down. Like, let's break down what great leaders are doing to their core levels and try to implement those things. I hate this idea that it's like, oh, you can't be taught to be X. It's like, well, I can't be taught to improve. I can't be taught to even make my way there. Like, look, maybe I'll never be Winston Churchill, but I can't improve at all. I don't like that idea.
Well, I at this stage of my life, I claim that I'm living proof that leadership can be taught, because if it was not true, I wouldn't have had a job for the last 16 years. I've been able to work with the hundreds of individuals who have been promoted up into various roles, either for the first time or long time. And they've now entered a new level, and they need help, because what they used to know or what they used to believe, as Marshall Goldsmith famously says, what got you here won't get you there.
Yep.
And I'm a big believer in that, and that's why the whole leadership journey is a lifelong learning experience.
Yeah, I've talked about that quote many times on my podcast before here, because so often you have this entrepreneur or group of entrepreneurs that start a business, and it starts with one person or two people, and you're doing everything yourselves, and you have to grind, and maybe you have to work 10 hours, 12 hours a day, and you have to take everything as your own pet project, and you can't give that project up to anybody else, because there's no possible way they're going to care as much as you or know what your vision for this thing is. And then you hit a certain velocity when it's 10 people, 15 people, 20 people, 25 people. And all of those skills that you were previously rewarded for are the absolute wrong skills to take into the next level of the business, where it's like, I have to grind. It's like, no, you have to hire. like you have to grow your team. Like, right. Not just say, I'm going to do everything myself. Nobody can understand my vision. It's like, no, you have to delegate. Nobody can possibly, work as hard as me and understand the vision. It's like, no, you have to put standards in place and train others. So all of these things that got you to where you are and gave you that reward are really the opposite skills that you need. And they're going to really limit your growth. And that is really hard for entrepreneurs to understand, that, hey, I once got rewarded with this behavior, so now I'm going to continue to get rewarded with this behavior, right? Well, no, you aren't.
Well, that's why so many entrepreneurs get in trouble. And I learned this in my banking days. I watched companies grow, from startup to scale up, and but many of them, not all of them, thankfully, but many of them would hit some kind of plateau or more like an invisible wall, and they would just crumble. They would just crash and burn. And it bothered me. I thought, man, you've worked so hard. I've known you for 6 years and you were just doing so great. What in the world happened? And I actually put a name on it. I studied it with my clients I was dealing with, and I call it the paradox of success. As the company grows, the very thing you're looking for is success. You want to expand market share, grow gross revenue, et cetera, et cetera. But if you as the entrepreneur are not growing with the business, you're going to hit that invisible wall.
Yes.
You're going to be unable to make the next decision for the good of the company. And that could create the downfall of the business because you didn't make that decision.
Do you see that at a certain number of people, a certain revenue? Where have you historically seen that be?
Historically, it's probably in the realm of a business that finally gets up into some really respectable numbers, like the 15 to 20 million mark, if they truly started from scratch.
Mm-hmm.
And had really nothing to begin with, but they get on up there. You can muddle through. You can do those things you were talking about, owning the vision, and nobody can do it like I do, and I'm going to have my finger on everything. But what you do, you become that little pinch in the hourglass, as
the bottleneck.
Yep. The bottleneck of the business when you demand that it operate that way. But typically, some of the first evidence is when the business is big enough, if you don't already have maybe an operations manager or a sales manager or a production, shift leader, if you're in manufacturing, when you're still the guy doing all of that, you're probably on the brink of that destruction.
Yeah, one thing that I recently heard that I just loved is reframing any, declarative statement that you make, like nobody cares about the company as much as me, into I lack the skills in this way. So it's like I lack the ability to put our standards in place. Like nobody can sell as hard as me. It's like I lack a qualified sales manager. Well, nobody's going to care as much about the quality of our work. It's like I don't have standards in place that are adhered to about quality. It's like, when I reframe it, it's really a people problem or it's a skills problem is what it ends up being.
Yeah.
And a lot of entrepreneurs are just like afraid and or unable to admit that they lack the skills to do the thing that they believe is the bottleneck at the business.
Right.
Like there's no one out there who's going to be as smart as me in taking this project on. It's like, I lack the skills to hire competent individuals. Like I lack the understanding of the job market. I lack the ability to write an operations manual for this thing. And I just loved that because then, just as most things are in leadership and entrepreneurship, you point the fingers back at yourself and you go, hey, if I want to fix this, it starts with me.
Well, and all of that can ultimately be summed up with the statement, I lack the trust in the people around me to let them run with what I need them to do.
Yeah. And maybe it's the trust, but part of it, like we talked about with the block, it's like, well, I don't trust them. Why? Because I didn't tell them how I want it done, what I want done, when I want it done. And I didn't give them any motivation to get it done. So it's like, yeah, well, those people probably won't get it done. I joke with people like, how long have you been doing this job? Well, 5 years. Okay, so how long has that person been doing the job? 2 weeks. It's like, yeah, they probably aren't going to be as good as you are at it. They probably aren't going to understand the nuances that you understand. Yep. Like trying to hold them to the standard that they're as good as you at week 2 is kind of ridiculous.
Yeah.
The actual limiting factor is your ability to train them based on your 5 years of skill. It is not their ability to learn material.
Totally. Agreed.
Doug, 2 last things. One, I want to hear your favorite leaders of all time throughout history. I know you said you're a reader, and I'm interested to hear what maybe individuals throughout history stand out to you? And then you wrote a book, so we got to hear about that.
Yeah. So, quick answer to that first one. Every time I'm asked that question, I go back to Abraham Lincoln. I've read a number of books. One of the favorite books that was written, and I'm drawing a blank on the author because it was a historian-based thing, but there is a book called Lincoln on Leadership. And what the guy did, he went through all the archives, all the libraries, all the writings, all the manuscripts he could find, and he picked out the demonstrated moments of leadership that Lincoln exhibited through the whole, Civil War era and all the turmoil that was going on then. It's just fascinating read, and talk about a long list of attributes. That book is just, every page is a turner for a new idea and a new principle. And so I love that.
Donald T. Phillips, Lincoln on Leadership, Executive Strategies for Tough Times. If anybody's wondering, it's $9.99 on Amazon.
There you go.
That's a deal right there.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a great one. And I go back to it from time to time to kind of get inspired with another angle if I'm stuck on a topic. My own books. My original book was called The Uncommon Commodity. A common sense guide for first-time managers. It's a short, easy to read. It's a little bit like the 1 Minute Manager. Every principle and topic is only about 2 or maybe 3 pages of content. So it's a fast turn. You can get through it that way. The second one, more material book after that, was a collaboration I did with a gentleman named Roger Ferguson, who is now deceased, but it's called Trust at Work. And it's a 6-part model that Roger and I put together that describes the key question. A lot has been written lately about psychological safety at work and trust between employers and employees, but not a lot of people have created a practical framework for how do you achieve trust. And Trust at Work is our effort to explain how a leader can actually do something to build trust. And I'll give you the spoiler alert. It's a simple premise. When we're meeting a new person and we're trying to determine if we trust them or not, we get there by asking questions. And think about your first date. What did you do? You probably spent most of the evening talking about questions. What's your favorite color, favorite food? Where do you like to go? What movies do you like to see? Blah, blah, blah. Well, employees have those same kinds of questions with their employer. And the best thing an employer can do is build an atmosphere where those questions can get addressed. And our framework has 6 buckets of where all those questions land. Every question you can ever come up with about the work and workplace falls in one of those 6 buckets. And I'm batting 1,000. Ever since we wrote this book about 5 years ago, I've done some team coaching on the topic, and I've given them the challenge after I present everything. Give me any question on your mind about a challenge you've got at work, and I show them where it fits in one of those 6 buckets. And again, batting 1,000, never had anything that doesn't fit.
Well, we got challenges, and I'm sure everybody out there does also. Well, Doug, this has been a lot of fun. Where can people catch up with you? Catch up on some of your work? I'm looking on Amazon. Looks like both the books are available on Amazon. I don't know if there's a better place for people to get them. And I know you obviously do this in person with leadership coaching. So where would people connect with you if they are interested in hearing more?
Best way to do it is hop over to my website. That is simply Doug Thorpe, THORPE.com. There's a lot of input, and I will tell you, Alex, you are the first show I'm doing in conjunction with a new offering I'm putting out at year end here. I've got a program I call Vision 25. It's an opportunity to spend 6 coaching sessions with me. And we can do it at your pace. It doesn't have to be all jammed into a short window. but it's 6 very strategic coaching sessions to help you get clarity and set the right vision for your new year and any change or growth you want to do with your business. I'm offering it at a 50% discount of my normal coaching rate.
All right.
So 6 sessions is $1,500, and I've got a link on my website that will go live tonight. It's in the moment, it's not live, but it will go live this evening as we're recording. But it's dougthorpe.com/vision25.
That's fantastic, Doug. Thank you so much, man. I really appreciate you.
Thank you, Alex. I really enjoyed the time.
Thank you.